Welcome to Women and Resistance, a powerful podcast where we honor the courage, resilience, and revolutionary spirits of women across the globe. Hosted by Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, we uncover untold stories of defiance against systemic oppression, whether colonialism, racism, sexism, or economic injustice. From historic icons like Winnie Mandela and Fannie Lou Hamer to today's trailblazers, we shine a light upon those shaping a more just world. This is a call to honor the past, embrace the present, and build an empowered future. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Women in Resistance. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, before she goes into character, is Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire. Today, it's a bit of bittersweet, but we've been doing this for a while, but this story pulls at so many strings. But let me just give you a brief overview. So through Cape Town, through London, through Paris, through everything they did to her body, her name and her freedom, she kept that small necklace, most likely a gift from her mother during her puberty rites. The mom herself was a victim of colonialism. Died when the lady we're about to speak to was an infant. All the way to her own eventually passing in France in 1815 at just the age of 26 years old. Let's let her tell her story. So today we're speaking to one who would consider not just a body and should never be remembered as just a body. And we're talking about Sarah Baartman. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Baartman, for those who are unaware of what your story is or how you came to this stage of your life, could you just give us a brief overview of how you came into the world's consciousness?
I appreciate the invitation to speak with you today and to share my story. Born in an area now partitioned and part of South Africa. My people are the Khoikhoi people. By the time I was born, the Dutch had already made inroads and had taken our land and had enslaved my people. The story, as it has been told, is that my mother died when I was still fairly young. Some say as an infant, some say I was about 2 years old, but I was not raised by my mother. My father, forced to work for the Dutch, was what we would consider a cattle herder, and he was supposedly killed by the San people, who also were the original inhabitants of the land, and no doubt fighting for their own lives and their heritage. It is said that at that time, I, like the vast majority of my people, were in servitude to the Dutch. My name, as recorded in history, is Sarah Baartman. I married, and at about the age of 16, my husband, who was also Khoikhoi, and I had a child, and that child died in infancy. And my husband was subsequently killed by the Dutch. Before I ever set foot in Europe, colonial violence had already shaped my life. I served in Cape Town, serving the Dutch. A young woman with a dead baby has a very unique role to play in that time period. She can be hired as a wet nurse. And for those of you who are so privileged not to know what that is, let alone to have lived it, I will explain. The wet nurse takes care of the children, the infants of another, of their owner, of their master and mistress, and they give sustenance to another child from their own body. I breastfed other people's children to keep them alive. At that time, I served, some might say I was owned, by a Pieter Willem Cesar, gave me to his brother, Hendrik Cesar, to be their wet nurse. Hendrik Cesar was, as many of the Dutchmen, obsessed with the bodies of the Khoikhoi women. I actually, for a moment, had a relationship with a Dutch soldier, but he would soon leave and, of course, left me behind. During my service to Hendrik Cesar and his family, giving up my body to nourish their own, a Dr. William Dunlop saw me and took even greater interest in my body parts. He was a physician catering to the Dutch community, but he also traded in animals and other, in their words, exotic items from our land, which he would send back to Europe for profit. And at some point, he had the brilliant idea on his part that given the fascination of Europe and Britain at the time with what they called freak shows, you can look this up. They had in Piccadilly schools had a human being who was about 18 inches tall. They had a man who was considered the Irish giant. It actually started in the courts of their royals, who would often find, in their terminology, freaks to entertain the royals. And these human beings would be court jesters, occupy and titillate the royals and their guests. William Dunlop and Hendrik Cesar like to tell the story, and that has certainly been reproduced in a number of books and documentaries, that they approached me with the offer to go to England, to Britain, for a 5-year period to show my body with particular interest in what they would call buttocks, because according to their scientists, I and many women from my region had what they called stegapia, and that was a protruding derriere, unlike anything that they encountered amongst their genteel women. And that supposedly I agreed to this with the understanding that I would make half of all the profits, and then I would be returned to my homeland as a free woman. I would ask the indulgence of your audience to consider if, upon getting half of the proceeds, I would then be returned free.
What does that mean?
Was I really free
in the first place
to have entered into this so-called contract? Of course, no evidence has ever been presented of any such contract. And although I was a polyglot, I spoke multiple languages, as did and still do many Africans on the continent. I did not read and write. I suppose it would be like all the treaties and contracts that Africans supposedly signed over the centuries with these colonizers. Nonetheless, I departed on the HMS Diadem, a 3-month journey to England. What could have been my thoughts on that voyage? A life already marked with so much loss. These ships carried cotton and silver and animal hides, some animals, and of course me, Sarah, now called Saartjie by the Dutch, Little Sarah. Could I have known at the time that I would be introduced to the world as the Hottentot Venus?
So how did that name?
In England. And there were pamphlets that were circulating, just arrived from London. And by permission, listen to their words and their treachery. By whose permission? Will be exhibited here for a few days. Exhibited.
Language.
At Mr. James Sale Rooms, corner of Lord Street, that most wonderful phenomenon of nature, the Hottentot Venus, the only one ever exhibited in Europe. And they went on to advertise. In viewing this wonderful living production of nature, the public have a perfect specimen of that most extraordinary tribe of the human race. The contradictions. Are we human or not? Because at the same time, they said that the Khoikhoi people, the San people, we mated with orangutans, that we were the bridge between apes and human beings. This is an example of what was put out. And the people came in droves, 2 shillings to see me in a makeshift cage with scenes of Africa in the background. I was told to dance and to play instruments with barely any coverage. I refused to perform naked though. And they would have a little apron from my people just covering my lady parts, but with my buttocks out for the world to see. And then there were the private parties, the ones where wealthy and connected people would pay for me to be their entertainment. And in those settings, since they had paid so much more, I would be prodded. They would examine my labia. They described it as hangs from a turkey's neck. And even their women wanted to look under and inside and touch me. In a strange land, who would I call? Who was going to save me? I arrived in England, 1810. Some say I was born in 1789. How do they know? There are no birth records. I was no any more special than any of the little Khoikhoi kids that say I was born in the 1770s. At some point. Well, the slave trade had been abolished in 1800, but slavery itself had not been abolished. But an organization who was fighting against slavery was so appalled at what was happening to me that they did file a lawsuit to try and free me and to stop my exploitation, because that is indeed what it was. There are no records for my exact voice, just what they say I said. Before the judge with a translator, they claim that they interviewed me for 3 hours and that I said I was being very well taken care of. And it was my choice to be paraded around and exhibited in the way that I was. And so the case was dismissed with one caveat, though, that my almost naked body was offensive to the sensibilities of a civilized society. And therefore, I needed to be covered. And so the exhibition started again. But this time, I would have on very tight flesh-toned clothes. And would you believe it? The same society that supposedly was so offended by my nakedness were now no longer interested in paying their 2 shillings to see me clothed. And as the crowds dwindled, William Dunlop sold his rights to Hendrik Cesar. Again, does this make sense? If I truly had signed a contract and had free will, with less money coming in from the exhibits of my body in Piccadilly Square, a very famous place where today Africans who visit England still flock to in awe, with no remembrance of the history of barbarism, of dehumanization. So they decided to take me on a tour. They took me to Ireland and Manchester and other places where, again, I could be exhibited scantily clad in 1811 to prove a point that still eludes me. Hendrik Cesar actually had me baptized. I was exhibited all across Great Britain and the surroundings. Hendrik Cesar decided to sell me to an animal handler. Sieur Rue was his stage name, and he took me to France. For in his words, French people could not miss out on seeing this specimen. He claimed I was closer to an animal than a human. And my body, during a time when the concept of racial science became the rage, my body became evidence in a lie about racial superiority. Even then, I resisted, for they wanted me stark naked, just like the animals. And I would often be exhibited in a cage with a baby rhinoceros. And I was given commands just like the animals were. To sit, to bend over, to the jeers and the howls and the laughter. And then enters Cuvier. Cuvier was a scientist, and he claimed his interest in me was merely scientific. Struggled to find the words to express my horror, and yet not to be offensive to you who are listening to this story. Red eagle, all parts of my genitalia exposed, measured, audit, drawn, photographed. Not once, not twice, more times than I can count. And I stopped counting. There are depictions of me smoking. There are stories of how much alcohol I imbibed. Some even saying that my death was the result of alcoholism. Tell me, how would you have survived? Who would I call? My dead mother? My dead father, my dead husband, my dead child, my enslaved people? Who would I call in this foreign land? Who would I call? And there were those who judged me. They said I was a prostitute. And would you believe it? At the same time, French women got so concerned about their men's fascination with the Black woman's body that in their vaudeville shows, they started to put on blackface and wear outfits padded to extend their buttocks. Now the scene wasn't even any attempt at presenting me as a human being. I was a circus animal, like all the other animals. And even then, I refused to be completely exposed. They offered me money and would write about my gall in refusing. Even after their offers, everything can be for sale. Who knew when I made that voyage from Great Britain to France that in a mere 18 months I would be dead? Perhaps they had told me I was boarding a ship to go back home. I did not belong to myself. I died in 1815. Depending on when you decide I was born, some say I died at 26. For those who had my birth as 1789, but for others, I was a little older. I was still a young woman. They blamed me for my death. Some said I contracted syphilis or gonorrhea from being a prostitute. And if I were, who were my patrons?
Question.
Some say I died from pneumonia, that I lived in such squalor and hunger, and that in one of the later shows they were trying to get me to dance, and I pointed to my throat and to my knees, and I could not do the movements. Some say I died of alcoholism. You know what I died of? I died to free myself. I died of a broken heart. I died of great, deep despair. What would be my fate for the rest of my life? What was I staying alive for? Could I ever be free? Do you know the demons that come to live in your head when you have experienced what I've experienced? Do you know? I hope you never get to know. And so today I'm on the other side. But I am not at peace. I'm not at peace as long as my daughters and my sons are being exploited just like I was. And there are so many, maybe not in a cage in Piccadilly Square, but there are the shores of Africa where Europeans and Arabs come to play with our bodies. As I speak with you today, there is a woman, there is a man somewhere locked up, a different kind of cage that's still being exploited. How can I be at peace? I hear their cries, but even death was to give me no respite. Do you know what they did?
No, I have no idea.
Under the guise of science, he made a cast of my body. He preserved my skeleton. He cut out my genitalia and pickled it and put it in a jar. And they cut out my brain and did the same. And it was displayed in the museum in France. My brain and my genitalia were on display until 1974. My cast and my skeleton stayed up even longer for science. I was still being exhibited. They were still making money off of me. Even in my death, books were written and a poem was written. And you have the likes of, what is that horrible man? Goud, maybe? Do you remember the picture first of Carolina Beaumont?
Mhm.
Naked with her derriere sticking out and the
Yep.
champagne glass. And then Kim Kardashian reproduced it with the same degenerate photographer, and they think this is entertainment.
Amen.
And a poem was written which drew attention again to a crime that was in clear view of everybody. A museum and a country benefiting from the ongoing exhibition of my body for no other reason than I was an African woman. And Nelson Mandela, when he became president, he asked for my remains to be returned to South Africa. It took 8 years, and even then, it was the cast of my body and my skeleton, for they claimed they no longer knew where my genitalia and my brain were. But the irony doesn't end there. Today is what date?
You are listening to Women and Resistance with Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, where we honor the voices of women who have shaped history through courage and defiance. If you're finding these stories inspiring, take a moment to subscribe, share, and support this platform. Together, we amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Now, back to the conversation. Today is the 6th of May, 2026.
On the 6th of May, 2002, my remains, my skeleton, was returned to South the 6th of May. I was buried on August 9th, which is considered Women's Day. But the story doesn't end. I am buried on a hilltop, on a land that is still owned by the descendants of those who enslaved my people. Around my grave is a fence that looks like a cage. Nobody goes there to visit me. Even in death, I am still in a cage. And even now, my gravesite gets vandalized. I did not come to tell this story for you to come and gape at me. Will I show my derriere to you today? Will I be topless, as in my years of exhibition and the cast that stayed in the public view, everything exposed? I did not come here for that, although that may have been your interest to see the Hottentot Venus, a very derogatory term, by the way, for my people. I came to share this story, my life, as a warning and as a cry for help, not for me any longer, but for the living. If you had lived during the time of my exploitation, what would you have done? Would you have shunned me? Would you castigate and judge me? Would you fight for my humanity? Which, by the way, is an extension of your humanity. Would you have called to task the real barbarians, the real ones who acted worse than animals? Whatever your response is, what are you doing today? For all the sex trafficking victims, are you looking the other way, hoping someone else takes action? For my sisters, it is our divine right to celebrate our bodies as we were made by our Creator. But I do have a question. Let's say indeed that I had signed a contract, that I did know the contents of this contract. Let's say indeed that I was getting paid half of the proceeds. Again, 2 men trafficked me and they were going to only split 50% themselves and give me 50%. We know these are lies. You should know these are lies. But let's just say that that was indeed the case. Let's suspend all reality, all common sense, if I participate in my own exploitation. And I ask that because today That buttocks is still a thing of fascination, isn't it? So much so that some of my daughters are going to get theirs surgically enhanced. Maybe it helps you get a husband. Maybe it helps you sell more clothes or sell more record albums. Maybe it makes you more famous. Is the exploitation really any different if you participate in it yourself? Or does that not continue to feed into a system that sees us only as objects of some depraved person's desire? And what lessons, what message would you give to our sons and our daughters today? Black women's bodies, the judgment of Black women's bodies didn't stop with me. Obviously didn't stop at my death. Still ongoing today. Now people don't have to pay the 2 shillings or go to the museum. They can pull it up on their screens. The harm, I contend, is just as deep when you strip the humanity of a person, or when you strip your own humanity in pursuit of what? And those demons. Today, in the area where I once lived and grew up, there is a Sarah Baartman Center for girls and women, a place of refuge, open 24 hours, 365 days of the year. And for that, I am grateful. In 2015, 13 years after my remains were finally given some measure of rest, the students at the University of Cape Town, in a demonstration against Cecil Rhodes and Jameson, who had a hall named after him at the University of Cape Town, they petitioned. And the name of that colonizer, Jameson, was taken down from that hall. And it was renamed the Sarah Baartman Hall. I am grateful for that, because though I was silent while I was on top of the earth, some have heard my voice, and my cries from the other side have been felt in the hearts of enough people that there are some changes being made. But we must not stop. Understand that there are still, can call them the remains, that's what they will call them, that the bodies, the entrails, the skeletons of so many of our people are still in drawers and closets and cupboards all across Europe. How can I be at peace? We all have to go home. We deserve the dignity of a real burial. That is part of who we are as an African people who will continue this fight. Not just for me and the parts of me that they still have, but for all the others, nameless, faceless, their stories untold. Africa, we have much work to do still. And even as I speak, there are young men and women risking their lives to go to the quote-unquote Western world and to the Arab nations where their bodies are defiled, their spirits broken, because we have not provided safety for our own on our own land. So don't hear my story and just shed tears for me. You must come against this racism wherever it exists, whether it is couched in science, in philosophy, in anthropology, in literature, in politics, in religion. You must fight it wherever it exists, because it is merely a guise to strip us of our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Man, it's hard to follow that without a deep sense of history, understanding what pain is. I mean, it just goes to show that the sort of barbarism that was meted out to Black people across the world was uniform. The only difference is the location. And so, yes, we've spent an hour with Sarah Baartman. We're not going to refer her by the racist term she was called. Her story remains a cautionary tale for us to understand history, embrace history. And as we'll say over here, on Women and Resistance, it's important to resist, reclaim, and also remember. And that remembering is what we do here. And we continue to do. So next week, this is the 12th of this series. So which means we're going to have a review of the 12 that has gone before. Going to thank Ms. Baartman again for coming through. Thank you. So my name remains Adesoji Iginla until next week when we come to you with a review of the 12 previous episodes. It's good night and God bless. That is it for this episode of Women and Resistance. Thank you for joining us in amplifying the voices of women who challenged injustice and changed the course of history. Be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Together, remember, we honor the past, act in the present, and shape the future. Until next time, stay inspired and stay in resistance.